Title: The Gruesome Secret About Our Ancestors Science Tried to Keep Hidden. For a long time, the story of human evolution was told as a story of progress, a long march upward from brute animal behavior toward culture, cooperation, and civilization. The further back you went, the more primitive the behavior, the closer to the animal baseline. That narrative was comforting. It was also wrong. The evidence that has accumulated from paleoanthropological sites across Europe, Africa, and Asia tells a different and considerably more disturbing story. Cannibalism, systematic, repeated, and sometimes ritually organized, was not an aberration in our ancestral past. It was, in many populations, and for long periods, a normal part of life. The oldest confirmed evidence comes from Gran Dolina cave in the Sierra de Atapuerca in northern Spain. The site has been excavated since the 1990s and has yielded one of the most significant assemblages of early human remains in the world. At level TD6, dated to approximately 850,000 years ago, researchers found the bones of at least 11 individuals, children, and adults, from the species Homo antecessor. The bones had been processed in exactly the same way as the animal bones found alongside them. Cut marks from stone tools were present on the skulls, faces, and long bones. The marks indicated defleshing, the deliberate removal of muscle and tissue from the bone. The long bones had been broken open in the way that marrow bones are cracked, suggesting extraction of the marrow inside. The pattern was systematic and repeated across multiple individuals over a period of occupation. Homo antecessor is thought to represent an early European hominin that predates both Neanderthals and modern humans, and may be ancestral to both. The Gran Dolina cannibalism is therefore not the behavior of a distantly related animal. It is the behavior of a direct or near-direct ancestor of everyone reading this. A 2025 study at Atapuerca added an even more striking detail. Among the bones was a cervical vertebra from a toddler, approximately 2 years old, bearing cut marks consistent with decapitation and defleshing. The marks were identical to those seen on deer and other game animals from the same site. The researchers concluded that the child had been killed and eaten, and that the practice was not an emergency response to starvation. The sheer number of individuals over a long occupation period suggests something more systematic. The debate in the literature is not about whether the cannibalism occurred. The physical evidence is conclusive, but about why. Several explanations are not mutually exclusive. Nutritional cannibalism is the most straightforward. In an environment of competition for protein resources, the bodies of the dead, including enemies, rivals, or even members of one's own group who died by other causes, represent a substantial caloric resource. Processing them like game animals makes sense from a purely energetic standpoint. A second explanation is competitive cannibalism, the consumption of outgroup members as an assertion of dominance, a form of territorial behavior practiced by several non-human primates. A third is ritual cannibalism, the consumption of elements of the dead, particularly the brain, the marrow, or certain organs, as part of practices related to death, memory, or spiritual belief. The evidence that these behaviors were not confined to early and archaic hominins is extensive. Neanderthal sites across Europe, including Moulagursi in France, Krapina in Croatia, and El Cedron in Spain, have yielded Neanderthal bones with cut marks, percussion marks, and patterns of breakage identical to those seen on food animals from the same assemblages. The Krapina site in Croatia, discovered in the early 20th century, produced bones of at least 23 Neanderthal individuals that had been processed in ways consistent with defleshing and marrow extraction. Initially, some researchers proposed that the marks reflected mortuary practices, the cleaning of bones as part of secondary burial. But the pattern of marks, their distribution across the bone surface, and the percussion damage on the shafts are more consistent with the processing of carcasses for food than with ritual defleshing of the dead. El Cedron in northern Spain, excavated from the 1990s onward, produced the remains of 12 Neanderthal individuals, including adults, adolescents, and children, all showing evidence of systematic processing. The entire assemblage was found in a single chamber, suggesting a single event rather than accumulation over time. The researchers proposed that the individuals were killed and eaten by another group of Neanderthals, a snapshot of intergroup violence and cannibalism preserved in the bones of its victims. Early modern humans were not exempt. The site of Gorf's Cave in Somerset, England, produced bones of modern Homo sapiens from approximately 15,000 years ago that had been extensively processed. The skulls had been shaped into cups by careful removal of the facial bones and edges, a form of artifact manufacture from human remains that suggests a ritual dimension beyond simple nutrition. The pattern of cut marks and fracturing on the long bones again matched food processing rather than mortuary practice. Why did science resist this evidence for so long? The history of the field offers a partial answer. The researchers who found cut marks on human bones in the early 20th century frequently proposed alternative explanations: first, secondary burial, animal damage, post-depositional processes, because cannibalism was considered a charge too serious to level without extraordinary evidence, and because the implication for human nature was one that the field was not eager to draw. The anthropologist Marvin Harris, writing in the 1970s, documented the ways in which the profession systematically downplayed or rationalized evidence for cannibalism across multiple archaeological contexts. What the accumulation of forensic evidence since the 1990s has made increasingly clear is that cannibalism was practiced by multiple hominin species across multiple continents over a time span of at least 850,000 years, and that it was not aberrant or rare within those populations. It was a behavioral repertoire item, one of many strategies for resource acquisition, group competition, and potentially ritual behavior that characterized early human social life. This does not mean that violence and cannibalism define our evolutionary heritage. It means they were part of it, alongside cooperation, tool use, care for the injured, burial of the dead, and the long extension of social bonds that also characterizes the human record. The uncomfortable finding is not that our ancestors were monsters. It is that they were complex, capable of both deep cooperation within groups and extreme violence toward outgroups, capable of feeding family members and consuming rivals, capable of creating art and processing their enemies for marrow. That complexity is not something that science tried to hide for ideological reasons. It is something that the evidence has been insisting on, and the field has been gradually learning to accept for decades.